that have happened in the crypto space that could possibly have been prevented by following C4's cryptocurrency security standards. So we've got some auditors here from Halborn and Hacken, and we've got two of our committee members. And I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm the executive director at C4. We're going to do a little bit of a round robin intro. So Josh, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Josh McDougall, one of the co-founders of C4 and one of the co-authors of the original CCSS. So I've been here for a bit, but looking forward to chat about some spooky stories.
And by a bit, you mean the whole time, because you started it. You're so humble. Okay, so Ron, do you want to jump in since you were also instrumental in writing the standard?
Sure, thank you. I'm Ron Stoner. I'm currently the head of security over at Casa, and I've worked in this space providing services for exchanges and businesses for some time. I was a hacker on really both sides of the hat, so I've kind of seen it all, run the gamut, and I've been working with C4 and the CCSS committee for the past few years, really bringing the standard kind of where it needs to be, and then helping to write and architect the auditor exam. So very happy to be here today speaking about some spooky hacks.
All right, cool. And we have two different security companies who've joined us today. We have Halborn and Hacken. So why don't we start Halborn with doing intros. Dave, do you want to start and then circle around, and then we'll move on to the Hacken folks?
Absolutely. Dave Schwed, COO of Halborn. Been a member of the C4 consortium, I believe, since 2018 when I got my first certification. So really happy to be here and be part of the mission. Turn it over to Gabi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gabi Urrutia. I'm the VP of Security in Halborn. Yeah, very excited to be here. John?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm John Davis. I came from a background in traditional security, governance, risk, and compliance. So the cryptocurrency security standard is something near and dear to my heart since my time being in full-time blockchain. And I will pass it over to our friends with Hacken.
Yeah, great. Dyma, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Hello, friends from Halborn. Yeah, I'm happy to see so many familiar faces. My name is Dyma. My role at Hacken is a CEO. I'm ex-Deloitte, worked there for 8 years. So the whole crypto space for me looks a little Wild West, and I'm very happy to be here with C4, and I'm sure it's the future of blockchain standards. And Bartosz is our security lead. Please tell us a little bit about what you do in background.
Hello, everyone. So I'm working mostly with layer 1 protocols, forks of Bitcoins, Ethereum, Solana, and other protocols. And that's my job at Hacken. Before, I was working a lot with cybersecurity and gaming industry for a few years. I'm working with the blockchain industry.
Okay, cool. So we definitely have some security experts on the call today. So thank you all for joining. I think what makes most sense is for us to start just by giving a brief intro into C4 and how the CCSS started. So we're a nonprofit. We've been around since 2014. And we started with our Bitcoin exam, and then we moved into the CCSS, the cryptocurrency security standard. And I'm going to have Josh explain what that is because he helped write it.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, it was roughly around 2014-ish when we were starting this process. And there happened to be some very large hacks at the time, the most notable of which being the Mount Gox hacks, which we're certainly going to get into in a bit. But in general, it was just like embarrassing attack after embarrassing attack after embarrassing attack. And, you know, you're trying to revolutionize the world here. And it just seems like, you know, you're a bit of the laughingstock, especially in the security world, but certainly in the media as well. Anything that was talking about Bitcoin was talking mostly about our screw ups. So we wanted to, you know, there's a way to solve this problem, and that's standardization. But the other thing that was helping is there was also really good teams around the industry doing great work and building really interesting systems. But a lot of that was each team separately, independently reinventing the wheel every time, reinventing how we did signing, reinventing what our internal standards were. So as C4, since we're a nonprofit, we've tried to bring up a lot of these players together, and we still do that today, to make sure that we all work together. We can set those standards at a very high degree, understand what we're doing, and by standardizing, that means others who aren't security professionals can come in and understand whether or not a business is actually kind of meeting where they should be it insurance providers, be it customer sides of things, all sorts of different avenues here. Now, one really, I think, interesting piece of information about the CCSS is analyzing hacks, like we're about to do on this call, is one of the main ways we actually wrote the original CCSS. We took all those different hacks. We took Mount Gox. We took all these different, sore spots on our community, and we used them to our advantage by understanding, how did this hack happen? What could have been done to prevent it? And what controls could be, and what can be done to monitor to make sure that those controls are actually in place and working. So this exact session that we're about to do today is actually how we work and how we make sure that the CCSS continues to be effective moving forward. So with no further ado, I think we jump right into that fun exercise and head over to Ron to start talking about that critical Mount Gox situation or catastrophe.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, so when we're talking about Gox, as Josh said, there's been a lot of scams. There was hacks in this space in the very early years, but Gox was kind of really the biggest one that really opened everybody's eyes. I think it really hit home to what being your own bank means and custodying funds with exchanges and some of the risks that go into that. And I've heard Josh say it before, there's no control Z, there's no undo in crypto, right? Once it's gone for the most part. So this was really the biggest one because we're talking around $8 to $9 million, I think in 2011. In 2014, $615 million, right? I don't even really want to calculate that today. It would probably make me sick thinking about how much money was lost in that hack. But it was the largest exchange at the time, right? And when I think about the failures that occurred there and the different controls and aspects in the cryptocurrency security standard, I could probably make a case that they failed every single one of those, right? There's a use case probably for every control and aspect and rationale that we've built into the standard there. So I won't go into every single one of them, but the ones that really jump out at me, this hack was caused over a period of time. This wasn't like a one and done thing at 2 in the long history of the company, it was sold. There was a few different owners, and there's rumors that things like the private keys and the wallet.dat file were transferred and were being stored unencrypted. There was multiple copies of that had proliferated over time. They were also doing things like address reusing the same addresses. And this was still very early on. We were still figuring out a lot of the security wrapped around this stuff, but the failures there were massive, right? They didn't really have documentation or procedures. There was no policies, there was no trainings. They weren't even using things like code version control. And while that's not directly applicable to the CCSS, it's one of those things that we should always be looking at what happened in these hacks and can they be incorporated into standard. And when we talk about the CCSS, we're talking specifically about keys and wallets and management of that material, whether it be a wallet file or seed phrases or private keys. So I took a look at the standard, and some of the ones that I think really jumped out at me was 1.01.1, which says the cryptographic seed or key has to be generated by the actor using it. And when you look at the history of the company and the assets, a lot of that stuff may have been transferred over time and transferred insecurely. So that control right there, if a new owner come in or a new actor or a new user of that information system, that key material came in, they should be regenerating that and storing it securely. And that control directly speaks to that. 1.02.1, multiple keys for signing. That would have mitigated the risk of a key compromise or a key theft, where there would have been another actor present or system or control or some sort of mechanism to say, just because you've compromised one of my keys, you can't clear out or siphon the Bitcoin out of the exchange or the system. 102.5, documenting the wallet creation policy. I'm pretty sure that would have identified some security risks when you go to document how all of your stuff, your keys and material was created, to say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Owner B didn't create this key material, or this has existed since 2011. Why has this not been rotated through the history of the key or the company? And then the last one was really 104.1, key usage requires an end factor. And that's similar to the 2FA, the two-factor authentication people are used to today. You need an additional form of verification or authenticity for the key holder before you're going to be able to take actions. And I think just implementing some of these controls related to keys specifically and the rationale behind them would have mitigated the risk. May not have prevented it 100%, but definitely would have mitigated a lot of the risk and failures when you look at the Gox incident.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with that is the standard's free. Like, it's out there, anybody can look at it. So if you are basically being handed this standard on a platter that says, here are the things you can do to make things safer, like, I don't know why anyone wouldn't be doing this. Because it's right there, it's accessible. Like Josh said, you don't need to be a security expert to understand it. Hello, not a security expert, I understand it. So I think that it's a very good jumping off point, what you just gave, Ron, to start to talk about some additional hacks or to jump in and talk about this. Does anyone from Halborn want to comment on this hack in particular? Dave?
Yeah, I mean, not on the hack in particular, but, you asked a question, why don't most organizations, follow a simple standard that's out there? And I think the answer comes down to a rush to market with a particular product, as well as a lack of budget. So I think those two things are leading many new projects and even some existing projects to, really make some careless mistakes. Dissecting this hack and looking at all of this, the systemic, control failure is just astounding. But at the time, you have a product that wants to launch to market and wants to gain usability. So they're, how quickly can we launch something? How quickly can we add a new feature? Let's cut corners. Let's not do regression testing. Let's not add, detective type controls in order to, allocate budgets for, new developers. So I think it's really just this, balance of how quickly we get something to market and how can we, instill secure, SDLC processes within the organization.
The other thing I like to say is there's a bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect in this space where, people get a false sense of bravado or confidence, or think they're being tricky, or they're being smart, and in reality they're foot-gunning themselves and making themselves less secure. And I like to say, we know a lot about passwords and password generation, but if you think to the first password you set on the internet, it probably was not a very good one, or you were probably reading the name of your monitor and using that as a password, right? And like, a lot of people are doing this, generating keys for the first time or building these systems for the first time. And it's like setting your password for the first time. How bad is that system, right? And we should really rely on the battle-tested controls and the advice of the experts that are really in the trenches day in and day out, building and testing and breaking and revising all of these systems.
Yeah, just like, a personal story, without naming which organization, and again, it could be on LinkedIn or not, so I don't want anyone to try to figure out which organization I'm talking about, but, I was working for an organization or consulting for an organization where I just had this fundamental battle with the CTO. The CTO's mission was how quickly, and again, back to time to market, how quickly can I deliver something? And things were getting designed insecurely, intentionally, because it was quicker to get something in, or they didn't have to hire additional developers, or they didn't have to start. Again, developers are very, they love putting, API tokens, and they love putting private keys in Notepad on their desktop because it's easier to grab instead of, going to a HashiCorp Vault setup. So I think a lot of it also comes down to not just security, taking a look at it, but also, making sure that your CTO or CIO or head of development also has a security background as well. Like, security shouldn't be brought in as an afterthought to help secure something that was designed insecurely from the start. It needs to be designed, securely from the start.
Yeah, I love that point. Dyma, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. The fact is that not a lot of founders are aware of the C4 standard, and yes, they do struggle. Like, they want everything to be secure, but they rely on some magician who will come and give them magic secret how to do it. And so the fact is that, yeah, the biggest hacks are due to the private keys being compromised. And the fact is also that we do have a lot of companies with issues like that are still not being hacked. But the good thing is that we're in crypto, and it is possible to redesign your whole private keys management infrastructure by simply like setting up the proper one based on C4 and transferring the funds, and it is possible to do. And the question is now, how do we start pushing companies to start rebuilding their infrastructure, since they are so closed, and it's a lot of teams are even anonymous and you don't even know where they reside.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, John, did I see you nodding in there a little bit? Did you want to jump in on that? Or did I?
Sure, no, those are all great observations. And I'll just kind of bring it back to Ron's initial thought around the Dunning-Kruger effect and this disparity between how much we think we know versus how much we actually know. I personally found that as I was studying for the auditor certification for the cryptocurrency security standard, there was a delta there between my understanding of traditional security coming out of a GRC background and knowing all of these standards or working with them, and actually sort of contextualizing the best practices when they're applied to cryptocurrency, especially with respect to seed generation and storage, because those are some of the biggest threat vectors. If you can't secure those items, you won't really have a secure platform. And that's where I thought a tremendous amount of value came out of this program.
Yeah, Gabi, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so yeah, this is interesting because we talk about like the great challenges we have now, you know, in this year. We talk about at the beginning of the year bridges and stablecoin and super complex DeFi attacks. But if you go to the rec list, you realize in the top 12, you have 5 of the attacks are related to private keys. And it's like you are spending like a lot of money protecting your smart contract. But actually in these 12, top 12, you have also this super cool profanity attack, you know, in Wintermute. Yeah, so at the end, the simple, you know, it still works. So, and private keys, how to generate it, how to share the private keys. And so, yeah, need a fully review, because at this point you need to follow these standards, because if you fail in the simplest thing, you can be hacked as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Dyma, yeah.
Yeah, I want to add that we have a research product called CR.live, where we aggregate all the security data, and we've been analyzing 400 plus exchanges, and we were analyzing what do they do for their security. I mean, it's like, they have pen tests, do they have bug bounty, and so on. And we also are analyzing if they passed SOC certification, SOC 2 and ISO 27. What is your guess? How many out of 400 exchanges does have the ISO 27001 certificate? Just a random guess. Who wants to try? Out of 400.
I'm terrified right now. Like, this is the scariest part of Halloween. I don't want to know.
It's all of them, right, Dyma? Tell me it's all of them.
No, it's not. Okay, it's 10. It's only 10 exchange out of 400 have passed the ISO 27001. Imagine. I can name them if you want, but like, basically it's the top ones. Like, most of them are US exchanges.
Everyone's speechless.
Yeah. So, wow. But again, you know, like it's hard to imagine how to push these exchanges to change their because it's a hard work, you know, to, like, if you already established business, to restructure the whole rebuild your infrastructure according to ISO 27001, and sometimes they don't understand the value what it brings.
Yeah, I think it's important to, since you brought that up, to mention that the ISO 27001 and SOC 2 audits are complementary to the CCSS. So we still recommend you doing both of those. And then this one is specifically for the private keys. But I'm glad you brought that up, Dyma. Terrifying, and also kind of, I think, put some context around this. Dave?
Yeah, I also think it's our job as, users of the ecosystem in order to demand, these types of, controls, whether it's the ISO or, and/or obviously the, the CCSS, because I think what you're seeing today is you're seeing a lot of, people that are rushing towards these projects that are offering, percent yield higher than another one, but without realizing the only way for them to do that is there's corners getting cut somewhere else. They're not spending money on security. They're not spending money here. It costs more money potentially to be in certain jurisdictions that have more regulations, but that also instills confidence. So you have, people that are racing towards projects that are intentionally in jurisdictions that don't have, regulatory oversight. That should speak volumes about that particular project or that particular organization, that why they chose to incorporate or why they chose to, build in a particular jurisdiction. So, again, I think as a community, we have the decision of where we want to deposit our funds and which services we want to use. We should be going and rewarding the companies that are spending more money on security and working in jurisdictions that have adequate regulatory oversight.
I love that.
I want to add something. So what did work is when this research product started live, our rankings and data that we aggregated, we have integrated it into the trust score of CoinGecko, and 20% of the trust score is the data about security. And at the time when it was first published, all the exchanges that didn't have bug bounty, that didn't have penetration test, their ranking was dropped. And then suddenly everybody wants a pen test and bug bounty. And what I think needs to be done is that we need to make this push from, in my opinion, CoinMarketCap and CoinGecko are the main regulators and let's say trendsetters in our industry. We need to push them to start highlighting those exchanges who doesn't have at least ISO 27001. And the best, of course, is so well structured C4 standard. We need to ask them to start pushing.
I am all for that. I think that is exactly what we need to make a change.
Okay,
Josh,
let's do it.
Anyone got a contact at the product team for CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap?
That's on you, Josh.
Oh, crap.
You volunteered.
I find it. The other, oh man, that's happened to me a lot today.
I know.
The other thing that's kind of interesting is it's also on the other side of the spectrum, the ISO auditors, the SOC auditors. I've actually been contacted by a number of them who are like, hey, we're auditors, we know what we're doing. We're really comfortable with our standards. We know it exactly. But it's apparently a crypto something. Can you help us? And their fundamental knowledge of this industry prevents them from fully appreciating the different systems that they're looking at and understanding. A lot of like SOC is all about physical access and access granting and managing that process, but they don't necessarily appreciate what access means in terms of digital blockchain-based assets and cryptographic assets. So there's some education on the other side of things too, where I think if we can force them all to learn how CCSS complements, I think it would give them a really good understanding of what they're dealing with. But we have to hope that the people going in and doing these audits are also doing their research and understanding exactly what they're auditing as far as these systems go. And it's not completely different than what they're used to, but as the CCSS kind of proves, there are some nuances in that process.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we've talked about Gox. I want to talk about some other hacks as well. I'm officially already terrified, but I do think that one of the ways to influence people to be more aware that this is a legit problem, this is happening, this could happen to your money, it can vanish. And if you don't work hard for your money and it's just like falling in your lap, maybe you don't care, but for the rest of us, it matters if we're trusting someone that our funds actually remain ours if you choose to use a, custodian instead of storing them yourself. But so we, for the listeners, we have a list of hacks. There's no way we're gonna be able to cover all of them, which I think says a lot about how many have happened. And our list is just like kind of skimming the surface. So let's get into another hack. Who wants to jump in to talk about another one that we have listed, or one that really grinds your gears and you feel the need to get that off your chest?
I mean, personally, I love talking about the Ronin hack just because there's, so many components to it, between the social engineering and then, the compromise of the validators and then the poor configuration of the validators. That one, could have been stopped, I think, multiple times, between the social engineering and then taking over. And again, it was just, to me, that's another systemic failure in the sense that, you had a, particular, developer who was compromised, and then because of his access, they were able to get access to the validator keys, and then the poor configuration. You had the fifth validator that was defaulting to the decision of the four. So it was really, again, there could have been like 10 different controls that were put in place that would have stopped, or at least, halted or arrested the attacker's actions in order, to implement, some sort of circuit breaker or, some incident response. So to me, there was a failure on the preventative side and the detective side as well.
A little background on that one. So that was $625 million lost in that hack. So certainly not a small hack. But it's also, I like these hacks in general, because as a user, I think there's an expectation of decentralization. They use a lot of fancy words. Oh, it's blockchain based. There's validators. It's different actors. And then when you take away that veil, suddenly you realize that, yeah, it all came down to one person's access, really. And, how decentralized is that? How secure is that? It's hard to even argue it's distributed at that point, let alone decentralized. And you see this in a lot of these different hacks, where there's systems being developed out there that are being developed under the guise of decentralized networks, decentralized bridges, being able to move assets from one to the other through this thinly veiled custodialship, where it's supposed to be this network that has access and is validating these things taking place. And in reality, because of either poor planning, some of the other problems we've discussed, which is just a rush to market, we'll find validators in the future. Right now, we just need these 5 to work, and oh, it's working, great. We can now kind of forget about this because it's working, but we'll find more validators in the future. And then suddenly it all kind of comes crashing down after one nice little phishing attempt.
Yeah, and this does go back to the sort of speed to market aspect, because the reason that they were only using a 5 of 9 validator scheme was to keep the transaction volume high and reduce load on their network. And since then, they have stabilized a little bit more and moved to an 8 of 9 scheme, which is a lot more secure. But we've talked about a few things like the decentralization risk and the perhaps multi-factor, which is one of the CCSS controls, could have also mitigated some of this. But really, I think the most interesting part about the Axie Infinity hack was that they sort of upended the traditional attacker model, where a lot of times HR is your huge target footprint within the organization because they're opening so many files. They actually upended this because in this specific situation, they compromised the initial machine by posing as an HR department and actually sending over an offer letter. And it was the PDF that gave them that initial foothold, at least according to what we know right now. So really, it's a new environment we're operating in. And when you're dealing with, hundreds of millions of dollars and trying to defend yourself from nation state actors like North Korea, it's a different ballgame. You really need every tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, I mean, we're talking about millions, billions of dollars, and it's like, seems like this colossal amount. And I think sometimes that's something that's lost in translation, is that at the end of this hack, at the end of all of these hacks, they're actual people, human beings who are losing their money. And if we talk about someone who's like, it's not a big deal, you know, people say, oh, I got rugged or something happened, and they kind of blow it off. But there are people who, when they lose this, they lose something that could change their life or impact them. And so it's, I think, easy when you're maybe at like the top of a corporation or an exchange or something like that, and you're upset, but you don't maybe think about like that end user, that like, you know, single mom that's trying to make it, or like that, you know, 75-year-old who just lost their retirement or whatever it is. And so I feel like bringing that back to the human level is something that is much more like relatable and understandable. And maybe I'm a sap and I just pull at, you know, the heartstrings, but also like, if we forget that and we just look at like the large amount, we're missing how this is impacting people that, you know, ourselves, people we care about and whatnot. And so, you know, I think it's fascinating to talk about all of this. And at the same time, you look at like just the sheer number of these, and it's like, this isn't new. This continues. This has been going on for years. And there's a timeline, and, you know, it's 2022 and these key hacks are still happening. And some of the things that are being done are pretty like kind of basic. So I think some of the reasons have made sense, but it's just, I think as an industry, if we want to have mainstream adoption become a reality, then we need to really stop this. So I'll get off my soapbox now. I could rant forever, but I won't. Lucky you all. So what else do we want to talk about with the Ronin hack? I know that one of the things in the notes is talking about it was a 5 of 9 validator scheme. And we've got some other, you know, multisig and, you know, validator and key, you know, comments with that in the document. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about what that looks like? Like, what does it mean to have 5 of 9 or 8 of 9? And why is less more of a problem?
I think it really would depend on the use case in the system. Sometimes more can be a problem, but it really depends on the users of the system and how you educate them. So as I say, security is not necessarily one size fits all, but we try to make these controls in a way that they are applicable and mitigating the risk and securing the systems as much as possible for the use case. When we're talking about 5 of 9, 2 of 3, we're talking about multi-signature, where if you imagine, you know, signing a check to move some value, you're used to writing out the details and signing your name, and then that check is processed. In a multi-signature system, there's 3 or 4 signature lines, right? And you need 2 out of those 3 or 2 out of those 4. And they're different users, entities, organizations. They can be split up in a lot of different ways, but the idea is to mitigate the risk in case one of those keys or an amount of those keys are ever compromised, lost. There's a lot of different reasons that one signer may not be able to sign. So in a multi-signature system, what we're doing is we're really combining all of that. And there's a lot of back-end technical cryptography and hashing and things that are happening to make that occur. But very simplified, you need those signatures to move funds or make an action happen. And it's to mitigate the risk of losing or compromising those keys.
You know, something that stuck out to me real quick with that is like when we're talking about overcomplicating things and how it's not necessarily more safe, or like feeling like you understand something, like everything I just said, and Ron, your answer of like, well, it's not necessarily safer, I think is exactly to the point of this is why companies need cybersecurity crypto experts as auditors going in. So like as a layperson that feels like, oh, like I kind of understand this, like clearly I've been doing this for a long time, and like I wouldn't be capable of securing this system even with the standards. Like this is why we need specialists and experts going in and looking at this, because in my head I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense, but like it might not. So if you own an exchange or you work for an exchange or a custodial service, what makes sense to you might not actually be the safest solution, because there's all of these like nuances to it. And then Gabi and Dave, I know you wanted to jump in about that too.
Yeah, just, really quick, I think this is a perfect example of, optics versus reality. Optics wise, 5 of 9 sounds, wow, that's great. 5 individual parties need to sign off on this. And then when you actually look into how it was set up, 4 of the 5 were all owned by, the same entity. And then the 5th one was poorly configured to default to a yes if the other 4 said yes. So in reality, the 5 of 9 was a 1 of 1. So if you have a security expert that comes in and takes a look, that would have been very clearly written out and say, hey, listen, your 5 of 9 is not really a 5 of 9. And that's a huge risk right here. So I think it's really important to kind of, peel back the BS of, the optics of what an organization or what a company is putting out to the public is, here's my security white paper. But the reality though is, the public doesn't necessarily have the ability, the wherewithal, to actually, perform their own audit or to, read through the code. And so they have to rely on security organizations, and they have to rely on standards like the CCSS, that if you meet a certain standard, you can have reasonable assurance, and it's been obviously independently verified, you can have assurance that this project has a certain base level of security. So that's why I think things like the CCSS are so incredibly important. Sorry, Gabi, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, if you take a look at all the hacks, you can see how, if 2 of these 3 conditions are met, or maybe all 3, the hack happens. The first one is something related to Web 2, because RPCs, front end, cloud, this is Web 2 things, but actually many Web 2 things are part of the hacks. Another one is Web 3 things, these smart contracts hacking the code, etc. And the third one is, we can say, bad practice. So at the end is like how you generated the keys, bad practice as human, like if you click on something, and bad practice in the code itself that's allowed malicious users, also known as attackers, doing things. So at the end, yeah, it's like you can recap all the attacks if 2 of these 3 conditions are met, or maybe all 3. So this is important because you should take into account these best practices, and maybe, as I said before, if you miss something, for sure the attack is not just related to one thing. This is super weird. It's like a combination of some.
Dyma, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to share a few things. So first thing about the Ronin validator thing. I think that there's, like, if someone wants to say that they have multi-sig with different validators, they need to run like kind of certification, like at the moment that when they set up these keys. And I think the services like Casa, products like Casa, should be involved for sure, and they can be those party who everybody's trusting that yes, this is legit multi-sig. Second thing is that Ronin hack, a lot of things went wrong. If someone doesn't know, they found out about the hack from the community only around 6 days after it happened, which is like ridiculous. But what is interesting is that like around 1 month ago, we all had BNB security incident when the attacker was able to mint BNB, and basically the chain was stopped. And we all know from the BSC scam that BNB chain, Binance Smart Chain, is also has a validator scheme, and but everybody is joking. I don't know, maybe it's a rumor that all the validators are one person, CZ, So, but there is a very interesting situation because we have a case when a blockchain was able to stop the operations and to fix all the potential damage it could lose. We which contradicts the decentralization rules and which probably contradicts that they really have a multi-sig in place, but in fact it has prevented from really huge damage to the whole ecosystem. Because if the Binance ecosystem will massively drop like Terra Luna, oh, that would be really bad for everybody. So I think what is important is that blockchains and all these companies who have this skeleton in their back, that's not that they run not one validator but like 4 or 5. They should publicly state about it, and they should say that yeah, we have the validators, but they all under our control, and if something happens, we will be able to stop and prevent from the big damage. That's the point.
So yeah, what I keep hearing is like they should have about all these different companies, like if they had. So the kind of undertone of it all is like there was an option to do things differently for a lot of these hacks. And so one of the hacks I think most people maybe have heard of is Quadriga CX, and somebody put Quadriga in here as something to talk about, and I think that's maybe something we all want to talk about. I haven't seen the Netflix documentary yet, but that was you too. I think Ron, you also wanted to bring it up as well. If you want to jump in on that, Ron, and then we'll go back around too. We want to hear from you as well, Dyma, and Bartosz, I want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, this one is really scary because it resulted in the unfortunate death of the founder, right? So when we talk about human loss, and I think you alluded to it, Jessica, I knew a lot of people involved in Gox. I knew more people involved in Quadriga, unfortunately, that lost money as a result of it. And I heard a lot of sad stories of people that had invested and left their funds on that exchange. And Quadriga is one that was in the news over the last year or two, I would say. And they were running basically a fractional exchange. So when we talk about the different controls to 2.03.1's proof of reserve audits, there was not really any proof of reserve or audit saying these are the amount of funds and this is the Bitcoin that we have in storage and this is what we have for customer deposits that people could easily go and see and verify. That right there would have been one piece of public information anybody could have used to say, is Quadriga operating on the up and up? The other failure I noticed was that the founder was the only one that had access allegedly to the key material. So 1.02.2 talks about redundant keys for recovery. And again, we're talking about the keys that unlock actions and move digital funds. 1.024's organizational distribution, right? So all of that power was kind of consolidated into one person. That person passes away, and now everybody's kind of scrambling going, what do we do? How do we find out how much money's there? Where did the money go? How do we move it? A lot of failures there that unfortunately resulted in a lot of heartache.
There's one super interesting point about that is, and it's the CCSS isn't just about protecting against external threats. That's certainly a big focus of what the CCSS is about, is protecting against external threats. But many of the people on this call who have worked on investigations will probably tell you internal threats are equally important. So being able to prove that the organization is structured in a way and the key systems are structured in a way in which no one person can walk away, no one person can manipulate the validators, no one person can sign every key or has ever accessed every key to be able to create that one of one in that big fancy multisig setup. And the other thing is that this isn't always about protecting against malicious activity as well. Sometimes this is about protecting against accidents. If you have a 5 of 5 multisig system, and one of your key holders is suddenly unable to access their key or is no longer with the company and refuses to sign or destroyed it, now those funds are stuck. So this is as much about protecting against both malicious actors as well as just disaster. And it's as much about protecting against external actors as it is, unfortunately, your peers within an organization.
Yeah, that was a really good point. Yeah.
What's the quote? Do not attribute malice to that what can be attributed to negligence.
Yeah. Dyma, did you want to say something
although
else?
it turns out Quadriga was definitely both malice and negligence, but I'll stop talking about that one first.
Yeah.
And
I know
Dyma, you
one,
respond, and then Bartosz, I'd like to hear, I know you had a specific CAC you wanted to bring up as well, so we'll circle to that.
Yeah, I know one exchange who basically stopped operations because the founders had a fight and they couldn't agree what to do with the private key where all the funds were stored. So basically, they dissolved operations. But yeah, I wanted to. I didn't watch the movie about Quadriga CX, but I was following very much the case, and I don't believe that he died, and I believe that he faked his death, but definitely it is the most the biggest takeaway that unfortunately the industry still didn't take it. That's the proof of reserve, of course. We don't at Standard Life we gather information about the exchange's reserves, and it's possible to see BTC and Ethereum balances. But even this is good to have, but you still cannot. You don't know liabilities towards your clients, towards your depositors. So even if you know that, I don't know, some exchange has 1 billion in assets, what is the proof that they don't have 10 billion in liabilities? And what is the proof they don't take the user's money and spend them? So this point of the standard is one of my favorite one, because cryptocurrency exchanges are black boxes. Nobody knows what is inside. Nobody knows how much money they operate and what they do with this money. So Quadriga CX is definitely my favorite one. And yeah, and Bartosz was there is another we have identified one research how the exchange basically lost money due to a security issue, and perhaps this case can be an example of how the standard can be improved. So there was updates to the core protocol, and that has created an issue. And Bartosz, maybe can you speak more about it?
Yeah, sure. So sometimes you don't need to be hacked to lose a lot of money. In 2021, the Binance lost 1 billion Dogecoins, worth around $150 million at this time. And it wasn't a hack, exploit, or a fraud. It was just a medium severity bug. So in the old version of Dogecoin, for some transactions, the fee was calculated incorrectly. It was too low. And transactions with the too low fee were rejected by the mempool, but they were saved in the wallets. And the wallets tried to execute them again every few minutes, but it was always failing. And the problem was that some users tried to withdraw the money from the Binance, the Dogecoins, but due to this bug, some of them by chance had a problem and the transaction wasn't executed. Because of that, the Binance assumed that the transaction didn't happen and just returned the Dogecoins to the user accounts, so they were able to withdraw them again after a few days. But in 2021, the Dogecoin maintainers lowered the transactions fees. And after Binance updated their Dogecoin version, all previously invalid transactions became valid and were executed. Within a few hours, 21,000 transactions gathered during a period of 3 years, transferring 1 billion Dogecoin, were executed. So out of users which had this issue with withdrawing money from the exchange, in the end received their Dogecoins twice. And this issue could be easily avoided by following cryptocurrency security standard. All they had to do was to read the logs, because there were every few minutes information that some transactions are stuck in the wallet and cannot be executed. And the second thing is they could regularly check balances, because in the wallet, it was visible that around 1 billion Dogecoins are locked, and they are not in the balance. So yeah, such a basic thing, like regularly checking the wallets would save them a lot of Dogecoins, and this issue wouldn't happen. So, you know, whenever there's something wrong, like the transaction didn't happen or your RPC command doesn't work, it should be investigated why it happened. It cannot just be ignored and assume that nothing happened. Yeah, that's the story.
It's a good story. Again, it's kind of one of those things where it's just like, oh my gosh, wow. But I really appreciate you going through that. I had not heard it about that way. So I do appreciate that. And one of the things I was thinking we could do, we only have about 5 minutes left. So I was wondering if we could go around and just list some of the other hacks. I'm hoping we can do a follow-up where we talk, you know, about more hacks and private keys, but just to kind of push out that there have been a lot. We can't cover them all, but maybe make it seem like if you're not totally familiar with all of these, this is real, this is happening. There are a lot of examples of it, and they started years ago and they're continuing. So it is definitely something that we, if we care about this ecosystem, should be working to figure out. So yeah, who wants to start with going around to name some hacks that we know of? Just, we won't go into detail, but just kind of list them briefly.
I'll jump in. Bitfinex in 2016, about 120,000 Bitcoin, worth 72 million at the time. Don't know what that is today, but basically 2,000 authorized or so transactions that were fraudulent, that shouldn't have been authorized. So verifying the spends, verifying the requests, all of the different controls that are baked into the standard, I think would have helped prevent that.
I won't name it, but it's a fun, unique one. Actually embedding some agents inside a mining farm and directing that hashing power elsewhere. Again, better record keeping would have saw, you know, a drop in expected value, as well as better deployment processes and onboarding and offboarding in that case.
I think audit trail and authorized changes as well. That would have helped prevent that.
Yeah, I'll talk about another one that wasn't publicly, I guess, disclosed, but I was working with an exchange where they were storing the private keys in clear text, and this particular wallet server was accessible to the internet via RDP. So it was a simple RDP exploit onto the machine, private keys exposed, and it wasn't patched, and it happened to them about 3 times.
And we see that where developers need key material or secrets to be able to implement systems. And then they copy that where it remains on the laptop and the laptop gets sold, or they don't have sanitization procedures, right? That's all built into the standard as well. How do we're not only storing it and securing it, how do we then wipe it and ensure that it doesn't just live in perpetuity out there in the internet or in a landfill somewhere waiting for somebody to go get it or buy it off eBay and then tank your company for millions of dollars?
I think
Gabi?
I think the best to me is it's related to private keys, which is the Wintermute attack, because at the end it's like the way you generate. You know, when we generate something, we expect to have some randomness or something, and it's like when I started to study cryptography, it's like the probability of collision, it was in my mind all the time. And it's awesome how I usually say the best hacks came from bored at home, and they decide to, okay, how to reverse engineering, a lot of techniques involved in that attack, and it's really awesome.
Yeah, that one I think goes back to the profanity tool for vanity address creation. And yeah, I mean, that's something that the CCSS probably would have addressed. Like how are your, like the base cryptography of the program? You know, sometimes people measure the temperature of their CPU and take the, you know, the 100,000th digit, because those are generally pretty random, but you really have to get around that some way.
Okay, well, we have about 2 minutes left. So I wanted to just let everyone who's watching know that we're going to keep doing these live streams to make sure that there's more information about the CCSS and how organizations, companies can be following this to protect your money. So if you're listening, we're talking about your money. You know, the change you have in your pocket, the change that you have in that exchange that you might not really think about. This could happen to you if it hasn't already. And talking about the amount of money that has been lost, maybe it has happened to you. So November 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to do another one of these about data sanitization and how that impacts the CCSS and what we can do to keep making the space safer. So thank you all on this call for joining. Thank you everyone for watching. Any closing remarks anyone would like to say before we say goodbye?
I just wanted to add the standard itself is open source and out there. So if you want to read it, consume it, implement it, contribute to it. This is something that we meet on all the time and constantly revise to keep up with things like how does smart contracts come into play? How does MPC? So we're always looking for talent and suggestions to help enhance the standard as time goes on.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ron. Okay, well, thank you to Halborn and Hacken and Ron and Josh from C4. And we so appreciate you spending our time to try to make the crypto ecosystem safer. So we will